So it's time to turn our attention to JavaScript. And JavaScript, the people that write JavaScript primarily as their main language, love to point out that JavaScript is the most popular programming language in the world. And technically, they're right. But they're not right because people use it to build the most professional applications, or it's used in the vast majority of large-scale projects. It's the most commonly used because people copy and paste JavaScript off the internet without even knowing what it does. Or they use something like jQuery and don't really understand the underlying structures and principles behind JavaScript. And instead, again, they just copy and paste. And there's nothing wrong with copying and pasting good code and using it, or using external packages that are well written, well maintained, and well supported. But we're going to use JavaScript in a slightly different fashion. We're going to learn the basics of the language so we can do some useful things. So the very first thing I'm going to do, I have this is where I was working on the last time I was working on this project. I'm going to close that. And if I have the text editor still open, which I probably do, I'm going to close all the files in that and quit out of it. And I'm going to take this working HTML folder. I'm going to rename it. This is the folder that holds all the files we've been working on for our building of the HTML files. I'm going to rename that. I'm going to rename it to HTML source. And then I'm going to move that into my actual Git repository, just so I have a copy of it and I can work from it right within my IDE, which happens to be Golang in my world. So I need to find those, and let's go here and go up one level, find my Visual Studio projects. They're there. And we're working on bookings, and I'm going to drag that folder right into the root level of my project. And then I'm going to go over to my IDE, which is right here, and it should show up on this side as something that needs to be added to my Git repository. So I will find it, which is right here, and I will add the whole folder. And I could have right-clicked and chosen Git add, but I just know the keyboard shortcut. And then I will commit and push. Commit, adding HTML source files. Give it a push. And off it goes. So now that that is committed, I'll wait for the push to finish. There, it's pushed. So now I'm going to start working with JavaScript. And I'm going to do so by opening up, well, I'll just create a new page in my HTML. No, we'll use an existing one. I don't have to rebuild one from scratch then. So I'll go to that book file. Not that one. That one should have been deleted. Let's delete that. It's now called reservation. I'll go to the reservation file. And what I'm going to do is just hide a few things so I can see what's going on. I'll hide the head. And I'm going to come down here to the container and clean it up a little bit. And format the whole thing. Good. Okay. And clear these spaces out and hide this div. All I'm doing is collapsing it in my IDE. So it collapses it, and then I can bring it back by clicking here or clicking here. But it just gets it out of my way. And I'll hide my list of files on the right to give me more screen real estate. All right, we're going to write some JavaScript. Actually, technically speaking, we've already written some JavaScript. I see I have some left in here that doesn't need to be there. Let me get rid of that. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so this is where you should be right now. You should have a file that's more or less the same as what I have. And what I'm going to do is write some JavaScript. And I'll start with really basic stuff. First thing to bear in mind is that JavaScript files usually go at the bottom of your page just before the closing body tag. You'll see a lot of tutorials online that tell you to put them at the top of the page. There are certain circumstances where that's a good idea, but in the vast majority of cases, in order to improve your page loading time, you put them at the bottom. And every JavaScript that exists in a web page, as an embedded part of the web page, has to have script tags around it. And you notice we already have script tags here, and technically speaking, if I was to go and open this file, which I can do right now, if I copy this URL, and I go to my web browser, and I just paste that part in there, it actually shows me the JavaScript file. And it's compressed to make it faster, to download faster, but this is just JavaScript. And the contents of that file actually exist within a script tag on my page. And we're doing the same thing here, but instead of having the file stored on a remote server somewhere, we're making it a part of this file. Now all I'm going to do is write a basic JavaScript directive. And it's not going to do anything on the page, but I'll show you that it does in fact run. I will write console.log I am printing from JavaScript. And it ends with a semicolon. So I'm writing console.log and then in parentheses with quotation marks around it, some text. Printing. I apparently can't type today. Now, when I save this file and go to my web browser and open it, and now it's in my Visual Studio Code project. So where is that? TCS, Visual Studio Code, right there, and bookings, and HTML source, and I'm working on reservation. Nothing appeared to happen. But if I go over here and click on the Open menu, and it's a little bit different in Chrome, but I think it's in the same spot, and try to find the console, which is probably under Web Developer, and look for console. It's probably it there. Yes, notice that it printed, I am printing from JavaScript to the console. So I just wrote a little bit of JavaScript that wrote to the console. I can go back here and say, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to just do that. I want to display an alert. One of those little pop-ups, alert. Hi, hello. All that's going to do is pop an alert. So let's go back here, reload the page, and it says, hello. Ugly alert, but it is an alert. So that's how JavaScript basically works. You have to put it within these script tags. Now, none of this is useful at all. Nothing about this is useful. So let's try doing something a little more useful. Let's go back to our page and think about what we want to do. Well, to start with, let's put a few things on this page. I'll put it outside of the form, and it's important that you do that. Don't overlap tags. I'm going to create a new, actually I'll make it right outside of the row. So here's the row, and the closing tag for that row is down here. I'll create a new row. Div class equals row. Div class equals call. I'm using my Emmet now because I'm back in my IDE, so I have it installed here. Div class equals row, div class equals call, and now I'll put let me put what shall I put in here? A paragraph of text. So P, and I'm going to give this one an ID. ID equals my paragraph. And I'll put some text in here. This is some text. All right, save the page, go back, reload it, make sure it appears there. It does. Get rid of that alert because that's going to bother me every time I reload the page. So let's get rid of that. Save it, go back, reload the page. There it is. And notice it's still printing to the console because I didn't remove that. And there's my paragraph of text. And that paragraph of text happens to have an ID. And one of the things you do an awful lot in JavaScript is say, I want to affect something on the page. I want to make a change to the element with a particular ID or a particular class, whatever it may be. I need to have some means of selecting that text. So I'm going to look at this again. I have a paragraph with an ID of my paragraph, which I'm going to copy. And I want to select that paragraph of text using JavaScript. And you do that using a really unusual but not that difficult to learn syntax. In my document, that's the keyword, I want to get an element by ID. Get element by ID, okay? And inside of that, I have to have a string, and it has to be the name of the element. And my element is going to be my paragraph. I've now selected that document, or that element, okay? Now, it looks like I have an error here. What is it saying? Unresolved function, get element by ID. I didn't capitalize the B. Get element by ID. That's better. Now I've selected that element, okay? And what am I going to do with that? Well, I am going to store that selection into a particular variable. And I'm going to name the variable with the keyword let my L equal document get element by ID. Now I can save that, and I can run it, and nothing will have happened. It still just prints to the console, okay? But if I want to make a change to that element now, I can do it. Because I've stored it in a variable, I can actually say my L dot. And look at all the things that I can do here. Add event listener, access key label, whatever it may be. I'm going to actually add a class to it, okay? I haven't done that yet because I want to come up here to the very top and create in my head another style. And I left this P1 blank. I'm gonna delete it already because I never did do anything with it. But let me actually add a new style here, okay? And I'm gonna call it red text, like that. And then I define it, and I'm just gonna say color red, okay? So I've got this document here right now. This is black text. And what I want to have happen is, as soon as this document loads, I want to change the color of the text that's stored in the element named myl. So a paragraph. So it's a p tag, and I'm going to assign a class to it. So I address it, or I do that by typing my variable name, myl. And because myl is a reference to a particular ID in the DOM, the document object model, I actually have some methods available to me. And the one I want is class list. And class list actually just gets the classes, the CSS classes that are assigned to that p tag. And right now there are none. And then I want to add one. So I'll choose add. And my token, my string, will be the name of my class, which I believe was red text with a lowercase e. And I save that. Now if I go back to my web browser and reload the page, right now it's actually just black text, but as soon as I reload it, that should fire. And it does. So it assigned a class to that. Now if I view source on this page and look for my paragraph, there it is. It doesn't have the class assigned to it at all. But if I inspect this element, and if you've never used this, this is a really useful tool. Right-click on your page where you want to inspect and say Inspect Element. And it will open this up and it will show that it is ID my paragraph, and here it has class red text. That was actually assigned by our JavaScript. Now that's not terribly useful. It would be more useful if I clicked a button or took some action and then the color changed. Well, we can do that too. Let's go here. Let's just comment this out, okay? This whole section right now. And well, I'll just comment this one out. And now I want to add a button. So I'll put it right up here below this. I'll put P, put it in a paragraph, and I'll put, button class equals button outline, but I gotta spell that right, secondary, which I believe is one of the ones built into Bootstrap, and click me. And I need to give it an ID. ID equals color button. Okay, so I've got that saved, or I've got that entered, and I have no JavaScript firing. When I go back and reload the page, I should just get a button underneath it, and clicking it does nothing at all, okay? So now we need to add a listener, a JavaScript listener that says, listen, as soon as you've loaded this document, I want you to look for a particular element, and I want you to listen for certain actions. And we do that in much the same way that we did before. We go document, get element by ID, and this time the ID that I want to affect is my click me button, which has the ID of color button. And we want to add an event listener. And the event listener is a type click. And what do I want you to do? Function, and this is a function that's built right into, it's just an anonymous function. Whenever anybody clicks that button, here's what I want you to do. I want to say, well, this stuff right here. So I'll copy this, paste it in here, uncomment it, and save this text, or save my document. Now when I go back to my web page and reload it, and we'll go to the console again just so we can make sure there's no errors thrown up. When I click this, this now has a listener associated with it. And what it should do when I click it is look for this element and add a class to it. And it does. Perfect. Can I make that a toggle? Well, quite possibly. Let's see if we can figure out how to do it. So this time, rather than just changing the text or adding the class every time that button is clicked, what I want to do is test and see if it has that particular class associated with it already. So how do we do that? Well, let's try it out like this way. An if statement in JavaScript is pretty straightforward. If document, we don't need to, if myl class list dot, and we can say, does it contain? If it contains the string red text, then we want to undertake a particular action. Otherwise, else, we want to take a different action. So we need to close our curly brackets here. So the syntax for an if statement in JavaScript is very much like the syntax for an if statement in Go. The difference is Go doesn't have these parentheses around it, and JavaScript insists that you have them. In fact, if I leave them out, it'll just throw an error. It won't even run. So here, if we were saying, go to this element, which is my paragraph, see if its list of classes contains red text. If it does, then I want to remove it. So I can do it now. My_l classlist dot remove, and the token I want to remove is red text. Otherwise, add it. So when I save it now and go back here and reload the page, this should become a toggle. And it is. That works perfectly. So JavaScript is not that difficult to learn. It's really easy to write bad JavaScript. And we're going to try to avoid doing that at all costs. So what can we do that's more useful than just changing the colors of things? Well, let's go back, just for fun, to getbootstrap.com. And let's go to the documentation. And let's look for forms, which are under components, I think. Forms. And let's look at form validation. And it's right here. Validation. So, the way that this works is pretty straightforward. If you come down here, I mean, it'll show you right here. I try to submit this form, and it says, oh, look, this is all nicely red. It's got an error message here. As I type something in, it turns back to green. This is far more attractive, and I argue far more useful, than the kind of built-in browser validation that we have. Now, the way that this works is you have to add no validate to our form, which is easy enough to do. We can add that. And we also need to put these things, the error messages or the success messages, straightforward. So these are success messages. They have the class valid feedback, which is part of the Bootstrap framework. This is invalid feedback, which is part of the Bootstrap framework. This is the part that we have to add. So example starter JavaScript for disabling form submissions if there are invalid fields. Well, we can use this as a starting point. I can actually copy this entire anonymous function, and I can go back to my HTML in my editor, and I can actually put it right here. So I don't need this anymore, so I can delete that. And what is it saying here? Let's go through it and make sure it's all right. Window, add event listener. Well, window just says that's what the document lives in, so that's the very top level. It's the just before the document. Window, add event listener on load. When the web page loads, execute this function. And again, it's an anonymous function. So the first thing it says is fetch all the forms we want to apply custom Bootstrap validation to. No problem. So we'll have to add the class needs validation. Let's go do that right now. So we've got no validate here. No validate class equals needs validation. Okay. And scroll back down and read some more comments. So we get our form. So that stores that form that has the class need validation in this variable, which I'm going to call let because I don't like the var keyword. I'm going to use it let instead. Var is old. And then loop over them and prevent submissions. So if there's one form on the page that has the class needs validation, it will load just one form into the variable forms. If there are three, it will load all three into the variable forms. Then it actually will loop through this, and it's actually creating an unnecessary variable there, so we don't really need that. So I don't know. These guys were kind of sloppy. We're just going to loop through our forms and perform actions upon each individual form. So what we're doing here is add event listener submit. On that form, when the submit is called, execute this. If the form check validity is equal to false, then stop and add the form was validated. So we're just looping through this and we're checking to see if something is valid or not. Now, where does this come from? Returns whether a form will validate when it is submitted without having to submit it. Okay, so that's built in, no problem. And then we add our class list was validated to this. And Bootstrap is smart enough, when we're adding that class, we can determine whether or not we should add the one that turns it red or the one that turns it green. So it's kind of like magic, and we're kind of doing exactly the sort of thing I talked about earlier, which is to say, copying and pasting someone else's JavaScript, but we're just getting started. So let's see if this does anything. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my page. I'm going to make sure the JavaScript console is open and clear it. So if there's any errors, they should show up here. So let's reload the page. This ran, no errors so far. Let's try searching availability. Ah, look at this. It gave me an error, but it actually made everything wide enough that it pushed it onto 2 lines. Well, that's not good. Maybe we can make our column a little bit wider, or maybe it's just because this JavaScript console is, yeah, that's just because my JavaScript console is open. So I don't care about that right now. Perfect. Now let's choose a date. Let's choose the 8th. Good. And let's choose the 23rd. Good. That worked beautifully. Now I should be able to submit the form, and I can. So that little tiny bit of JavaScript made this ever so much better. Now in the next lecture, I want to get rid of this kind of built-in calendar picker that's browser specific, so it's different from in Chrome than it is in Firefox and so on. I want to put a different date picker in here, and we'll use a third-party package for that. And then we'll get on to writing some more custom JavaScript.